Hi, it's Miss Sofferman. I wanted to talk to you today about a fiction genre called fantasy, science fiction, and dystopian. It's a very popular genre. It's actually our most popular, our biggest genre section that we have in the library. So there's more to this genre. I think sometimes people are like, oh, I don't like that genre because I don't like Harry Potter. There's a lot more to this genre than Harry Potter, although there's nothing wrong with Harry Potter. Fantasy refers to books that have magic, mythological creatures, talking animals. Fantasy often takes place in worlds that are not our world, in completely made up worlds, like Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, things like that. Science fiction is a genre that, similar to fantasy, it has things that can't actually happen in real life. Science fiction usually takes place in the future and involves potentially time travel. Sometimes there's robots or aliens or things like that in science fiction. Dystopian is a form of science fiction that involves there has been some sort of catastrophic event, either a war or maybe some sort of environmental disaster, and our world is forever changed. It takes place sometime in the future, and usually in a dystopian story, there is some sort of new government that is usually kind of an evil government, or at least it's a government that is not good for whoever the main character is. They tend to be often sort of hero's journey type stories, or stories that involve an unlikely hero. For example, Hunger Games or Divergent. Okay, so let's talk about some book examples. This book, Incarceron, is a book that I don't think a lot of people have read. So it's a story that takes place in a totally different world than our own. And Incarceron is a prison that exists underground. And it's actually alive. So it's this kind of being in and of itself. And if people get sent in there, obviously they just really do not come out again. So there are two main characters in this story. One is a boy who has grown up and has lived his whole life in the prison in Incarceron. And the other is the daughter of the warden of the prison. And so she knows the prison is there, but she doesn't really know much about it. And of course, her curiosity leads her to go into the prison. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but she finds out that things are not exactly what she thought they were. Ruby Red is a story about a girl named Gwen, and in her family there are people who can time travel, and they know this about their family, and they actually train the people who they believe are going to be the ones who will have this ability. And Gwen wasn't supposed to be her in her family; it was supposed to be her cousin in her generation, but somehow all of a sudden the time travel starts happening, and she's very unprepared for how this is going to affect her life. So if you like steampunk sort of London diaphanous ball gowns, a little romance, you might like this book. Incan Bone is sort of an alternate history fantasy story that has a lot of adventure. So what happened is the Library of Alexandria, which actually was a real thing, and it's well known in history that it was a center for art and writing and knowledge, and it was destroyed. And so, but it's still kind of, you hear it's sort of the stuff of legends. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched National Treasure, but there's the scene at the end where they find the scrolls of Alexandria in the treasure trove, and it's like a big deal because it's the scrolls of Alexandria. So this in this story, the Library of Alexandria was not destroyed, and it's known as the Great Library. And there are branches all over the world, and it's actually kind of the center for this evil government that is kind of controlling everybody. And books are not allowed. The only knowledge that is allowed to people is knowledge that comes directly from the library. So people are not allowed to read books, and you actually get killed if you're found with a book. The main character in the story's family actually are kind of book bootleggers and spies, although they have a respectable business that is kind of like a front for their bootleg spy book selling operation. And so the main character goes and becomes goes into service in the Great Library, gets a job there, and trains to be part of the Great Library as kind of a way to spy for his family. But things do not go as planned. And so there's a lot of very narrow escapes and a lot of adventure in this story. Savvy is kind of a funny, sweet adventure story, fantasy story. And it's about a girl who, in her family, when they turn 13, they get these special powers called savvies. And hers hasn't shown up yet. They don't know what it's going to be until it happens. For example, one of her brothers can make lightning and kind of control the weather and make all kinds of crazy things happen with the weather. So she doesn't know what her savvy is going to be. She's anxiously awaiting it. But all of a sudden, while she's waiting, her father gets into a terrible accident. And so she has to go on kind of a rescue mission to try to help him, which distracts her completely from finding out what is happening to her inside her own body. So it definitely, there's a lot of sort of suspense in this story, and it's funny and heartwarming. And if you like fantasy, it's a great story by Ingrid Law. Legend by Marie Lu is a dystopian story. So if you like Divergent or Hunger Games, this is going to probably be another story that you might like. It's a trilogy. And it's a futuristic society where basically the state of California is called the Republic, and the whole rest of the country is called the colonies, and they're at war with each other. Like they've been at war for a really long time. So this takes place in the Republic, and there is the two main characters are both coming from kind of opposite sides of the Republic, where one is she's the daughter of a bunch of elite military and is kind of destined for greatness, and the other is a kid who lives in the slums and is basically a wanted criminal. And the two of them cross paths and in a way that really brings them together, and they have to kind of join forces. And again, it's a situation where everything is not as it seems, and there's a lot of adventure, and the two of them have to work together to survive. And there's, maybe a little bit of romance thrown in there too. So Legend by Marie Lu, really excellent dystopian story. The Adoration of Jenna Fox is a science fiction story in which the main character, Jenna, has been in a coma for a year. And she is the daughter of some very wealthy people, and they live in this big mansion. And she wakes up from the coma and she cannot remember anything. She can't remember the accident. She really can remember very little even of her life before the accident. And so she's basically trying to kind of piece together what happened. And friends come to visit and they tell her things, and she just is like really frustrated and confused because she can't understand, she can't remember things. But little by little, she starts to piece things together based on some things that people have said around her that kind of trigger some stuff. And she eventually gets to a point where she realizes that her parents are keeping a pretty major thing from her. And then the adventure really begins. So I have a huge soft spot in my heart for this book, Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I can't believe I had never read it until a student recommended it to me. And then I read it and I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I never did, because it's basically kind of a spoof on Harry Potter. So it takes place, it's a wizarding school, and there are witches and wizards, and they are learning magic. And there's a kind of Dumbledore-like headmaster that is running the magical school, and he's very kind of quirky and enigmatic. And then there's an evil being that everybody's fighting against. But there's definitely some different twists and turns to this. It's very kind of sarcastic and funny, but it's also a little bit dark. So it's kind of like the darker, more angsty teenage version of Harry Potter. So if you're okay with that and a little bit of like sort of poking fun, it's a very fun book that I think that a lot of Harry Potter fans will enjoy. It does have a little bit of mature content in it though, so just make sure that you are okay with that and ready for that. So for all you Rick Riordan fans out there, there's a new set of books that I think that you should be aware of, and it's called Rick Riordan Presents. He didn't actually write these stories. So what happened is he has an imprint in a publishing company where he is trying to promote stories that are mythology stories from other cultures. So he said people have been asking him for years to write other mythologies from other cultures. You know, he's got Greek mythology and Roman mythology and Egyptian mythology and Norse mythology. And there's a lot of others out there around the world. He thought that those mythologies are better written by people who are part of those cultures. So this is a big push in publishing right now to publish stories by what's known as own voices. So they are stories about people of color and people in marginalized communities written by people from those communities. So some examples of those that we have in our library are Dragon Pearl, which is a Korean myth about fox shape-shifting spirits. Arusha and the End of Time, which is a Hindu myth that involves a magic lamp and a demon. And Sal and Gabby Break the Universe, which is a very funny story that takes place in the modern day about some kids who one of them can bring his dead mother back to life. But when he does that, it kind of puts rips in the time-space continuum. If you're a fan of Rick Riordan and you're interested in stories from other mythologies, you should definitely check those out. So there you have it, a set of nice fantasy, sci-fi, and dystopian books. We, of course, have many, many more. I love talking about fantasy, sci-fi, and dystopian books. So anytime you want to come down here and have me help you pick one out, let me know. Come on down.